Good evening, everybody. I welcome you to the seventh webinar of the Association of Plastic Surgeons of West Bengal. And this webinar is our second series on wound healing. I would at the outside like to thank Messrs. Convatec who have collaborated with us on this webinar, and they are beaming it to different parts of the country. To join us on this on this chronic wound management, we have three budding plastic surgeons of our state who are doing very good work in their individual fields and have acceded to our request to teach the juniors and the new plastic surgeons about the management of chronic wounds. So in the first part about wound management, we had dealt with wound biology and the biofilms, which was done by Dr. Kaushik Nandi and myself. And today we have Dr. Adhish Basu, Dr. Kalyan Das, and Dr. Saptarshi Bhattacharya to teach you about further wound management and scars. So to set the ball rolling, may I call upon Dr. Adhish Basu. He needs no introduction to the members of our state, but for those of you from around the country, most of you must have heard of him. He is a consultant plastic surgeon at the Narayan Hridayalaya group of hospitals in Kolkata. He is a very good microvascular surgeon, and I think his main field of interest is head and neck reconstruction and different microvascular flaps. So may I ask Adhish now to please start his presentation on the surgical management of chronic wounds. Dr. Adhish Basu, please.
Thank you, madam, for the wonderful introduction, and I hope I can present Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So the topic of today's discussion is surgical management of chronic wounds. I'd like to share certain practical aspects of how we manage chronic wounds. And this will be targeted towards mostly postgraduate trainees and young plastic surgeons who have just started with their practice on these difficult patients. So a disclaimer, I have no financial interest in any of the wound care companies. So these are the clinical scenarios that we come across frequently in our practice. Various types of wounds that come with a history of a long duration of treatment under various quacks and various practitioners of medicine. And what exactly do we see? We see an ulcer, which is often covered with a slough or an eschar, is discharging pus or serous fluid and a foul smell. And there is a soaked dressing, and this is a common presentation. And he or she presents an old prescription which declares the patient as diabetic or a person with varicose veins or had an old trauma or is bedridden. What you really need to see is the person himself, the nutritional status of the person, how mobile the person is, what does he believe in, does he believe, and his comorbidities, his economic conditions, his addictions, these all have a very large share in decision making in what exactly you would like to do with the patient. The region of the wound is very important, especially arterial supply, the nerves, that is whether he's having a lot of pain, whether there is sensation in the area, what is the range of motion, if there are any contractures in the nearby joints, which is resulting in the chronic wound, and any other lesions anywhere else in the body. And of course, the wound, you would need to remove the eschar and clean the slough to actually see the wound. The aims in all these patients are to treat the underlying cause, optimize the patient, and optimize the wound bed in order to finally close the wound. So we'll come to it step by step. We'll have 3 steps: assess the wound, repair the wound, and finally the definitive wound closure. So this is an eschar for my younger colleagues and trainees. Eschar is nothing but a dead piece of tissue. That is a tissue which has lost its blood supply but has not separated away from the body. So what is going on underneath the eschar is very important to understand what you need to do to heal the wound. Now in this patient, the eschar has actually come off, and what you see underneath is actually the biofilm. which is actually macroscopically visible, because these particles will not come out very easily by simply washing with water or any other solution. You need to debride them in various methods that I'll come to shortly in order to remove the slough. And in these patients, the colonization of the wound is medium. There is no surrounding inflammation, erythema, or tenderness. So this is a critically colonized wound, a chronic wound with a biofilm. Whereas this is a wound which has surrounding infection. So you see the inflammation, edema, pain has gone to the surrounding tissues and also to the digits. And here, if you take a quantitative wound biopsy, you will see there is high colonization with bacteria in these wounds. Sometimes they're presented with cavities. So they come with a small sinus, but when you open this sinus up, you'll find that there's a huge cavity underneath. And of course, there are patients who present with exposed bone, both in the calcaneum or over the tibia. Sometimes you might have to rule out cancer by doing a biopsy, especially when you suspect it. So to put it on in a tabular format, you have an underlying disease, whether an arterial problem, a venous problem, or a pressure or nerve or cancer. You have the patient's nutrition, his social support system, his economics, his addictions, his psychology, his pain, and the wound. The wound needs to be addressed in terms of cleansing, moist occlusion, debridement, and treat the infection. So let us come to the wound bed preparation. Once you have assessed the wound adequately and understood the patient's psychology and his family's psychology, and you have made a decision to continue to the next step, it's the wound bed preparation. And what it entails is you cleanse the wound, debride the wound, and dress the wound in order to optimize it towards the surgery. It is not that you jump straight away to thinking that now I'll do a skin graft, or I'll do a flap, or I'll do a perforator flap, or a flea flap. You have to go step by step, and at every step of the way, you have to find out what the wound is doing. So in order to cleanse the wound, this is a biofilm that you can see all the bacteria are enmeshed inside the wound. And it is important to remove all this biofilm and retain the moisture in the wound while doing it. This is a very seminal article that was published in Nature in 1962, which actually had domestic pigs. And this effectively proved that if you keep the wound moist, you will certainly heal the wound faster than if you let the wound to dry up and have a dry covering over it. So use systemic antibiotics only when the surrounding tissue shows signs of inflammation. And of course, the patient must have adequate pain relief, and there are multiple articles which have shown and studies that there is a positive effect on wound healing if you have adequately treated the pain. So how do you debride? There are a lot of ways to debride, and I think Dr. Das will go into the details of it. But importantly, what we need to do is there are various ways in which there are newer techniques like DAC impregnated dressings, and I'll come to it shortly, where the membrane impregnated with DAC actually can attract and attach the bacteria. And once you remove this piece of film, the bacteria come off along with debridement, which you see from wet to dry dressings in the gauze. This is one step ahead. You must have used hydrocolloid dressings as well. And these are nothing but cross-linked polymers of various gelatins, pectins, and carboxymethyl cellulose, which have a power to absorb the water, absorb the exudate of the wound, and it itself grows bigger and bigger in size. But as you'll come to see in wound dressings, what are the four components of a dressing, and how it is so important to understand what the dressings are in order to optimize your wound towards the surgery. The two important layers are the fixation layers, which may be a bandage or a silicone tape or a semi-permeable film. What is important, it must have a contact layer which is not adherent to the wound, so that when you peel it off, it comes off easily, there's no dressing, there's no bleeding, and there is no pain caused to the patient. And there are various types of contact and fixation layers. But what I'll allude to now is very specific, is that what is the difference between cotton, polyurethane foam, hydrogel, alginate, and hydrofiber? What exactly is the difference, and why do you need to understand the difference between simply putting a gauze bandage around it rather than putting a hydrofiber kind of a dressing around it? And that is important when you have a reservoir layer as well inside the hydrofiber, which secretes certain chemicals which breaks down the biofilm. So if you look at a scanning electron microscope, this is the gauze fiber. This is a foam that is used in a vac dressing, and this is an alginate foam. And these have all been hydrated. But despite that, you see there is no change in the structure of these fibers. They remain the same. It is just that the interstitials and the spaces between them that collect the water. But if you look at a hydrofiber technology, it is a hydrogel which has been incorporated into the fiber, and it is the fiber that swells up and catches all the exudate inside it, so that even if you press on it, it will not exude the water because the hydrogel fiber has absorbed it completely. So it's very important. In addition to this, it secretes the enzyme, it secretes the chemicals that is important in breaking down the biofilm. And with that, I now come to the definitive wound closure. Once you have achieved proper debridement of the wound and you have optimized the patient as well, now you think of what you want to do, and I'll share certain principle that I have been following. A very important principle is differentiating between healing and restitution. We have always been told that what is wound healing, and if you go to majority of the conferences on wound healing by dermatologists or by other associated, affiliated specialties which deal with diabetic foot infections, they always speak about healing. Now, healing is just epithelial cover of a defect or wound with the underlying tissues getting healed up and united. Whereas restitution, as we have all been taught in plastic surgery, is not only healing, but it is functional, it is structurally acceptable, and also cosmetically pleasing. And all these three things must be instituted in order to have a complete wound healing. And that is where I come to a very important principle that we have already learned about the reconstructive ladder that Stephen Matthews had propounded long back. So we, as plastic surgeons, always start from the lowest rung, which is secondary intent closure, then go to primary closure, then go to skin grafts, and then go to flaps. In that orders, such as if the worst outcome is at the bottom. The lowest technology is at the bottom, where you let the wound heal. And the highest technology with the best outcome is at the top of the ladder. Now this, if you look at the reconstructive ladder in that way, it becomes really, really wrong. What you really need to look at it as a library. So you use the ladder to go to the best outcome every time. So you go from a simple procedure to a complex procedure, but always with the best outcome in mind, so that the patient gets the best functional, aesthetic, as well as structural outcome. And you use the reconstructive ladder and you go up straight away, as in an elevator, go to the highest choice that you have in order to get the best outcome. So the final thing in a restitutive library is the best outcome, and the final thing in the reconstructive ladder is the best technology. So you have to make a very important distinction. So let me start with the lowest technology, that is healing by secondary intention. And you see this is a diabetic patient with an exposed calcaneum. Only with angioplasty and with proper dressing, as I have said, the wound healed almost completely. But of course, it has not healed completely because I have not done anything to the patient, as there were certain issues regarding the patient, as I've already alluded to earlier. Again, another patient who came with infection, and this wound with proper and thorough debridement, with proper dressing change, actually this looks as if it has been closed, but it is actually healing by second intention. I have not stitched this wound, and it has a proper and adequate function and range of motion. So with second intention as well, depending on the situation of the patient and depending on our multiple comorbidities, you can still achieve a high degree of function and structure and aesthesis in patients. Now this patient, as I had shown, requires debridement of the slough. This is after debridement and then with the skin graft. It's another patient with venous ulcer on both sides. So we did endovenous therapy, we did a Trendelenburg operation as well as skin grafts, and now it has healed. Of course, the permanent changes with the subcutaneous tissue have not changed with surgery. The patient with a dog bite injury who came after many weeks of conservative management, treated with a full thickness skin graft, and it can hardly be made out that whether it is whether she was bitten. Now, in this patient with a large area of degloving, who was flown in from Tripura after 2 or 3 weeks, you see there are multiple areas of eschar. Now, all the eschar has been debrided, and the tissues, healthy tissues, have been exposed, and the rest of the tissues can be geometrically realigned, and skin grafts can be used to close the wound. Local tissues can also be rearranged, especially when you have a head of a bone being exposed in a diabetic patient. You can excise, you can do a reamputation, and then easily close the wound with a favorable outcome. This is a patient who came with a Marjolin's ulcer of 20 years duration, which was tested, biopsied, and came back as squamous cell carcinoma. The entire scar needs to be excised, and a Pontine flap was transposed from the posterior side of the flap over the tibia to have a proper outcome. Now we see an eschar in a bed sore, so you debride it completely, and then you raise a superior gluteal artery perforator flap and advance it V2Y. This is another patient with exposed sacrum with a similar kind of a situation. If you notice that this is the midline of the patient and the wound has gone to the other side. So when you take a flap and advance it, of course there will be a contour deformity on this side, but you must ensure that there is a proper epithelium to epithelium apposition onto the crossing the midline, and that will prevent your recurrence. This is a patient with a radiation received 30 years back for keloid over the chest, and she actually had osteomyelitis, osteoradionecrosis of the sternum, and the entire sternum was excised along with the sinus. This is the heart with the great vessels that are exposed, and this is the part of the sternum. The manubrium has been excised, and this has been closed with a local myocutaneous flap. And you can see, of course, that she has again had some recurrence of the hypertrophic scar. This is another patient with a chronic wound of 20 years duration. This was also biopsied, and we found squamous cell carcinoma. This was a Marjolin's ulcer. So the entire circumference of the leg had to be excised, and a free perforator flap in this situation has been used because that is what would cause the best structural and functional rehabilitation of and movement of all his tendons, so that there is no restriction of the motion of the ankle or any kind of restriction of the tendons. Another patient with a wound, chronic wound following a trauma with damage to this extensor mechanism, was treated again with a free perforator flap anastomose to the descending genicular artery and the vein, and the patient can has a complete range of motion, both in flexion as well as extension. If you close this wound with a skin graft or you oppose this by tight sutures, either it will break down or the patient will have difficulty in flexing his knee. It's another patient with a chronic wound over the foot, and we used a free perforator flap. It is important to note that this is the area of the wound has been extended in a triangular fashion, because when you open this wound, these are old chronic wounds, and these wounds generally will not close very in a supple fashion. They will not come together. So you need to keep a wedge of your flap in order to compensate for this loss of elasticity of the skin. And unless you do that, you will have a compromise in the vascularity, and you will need probably have a flap failure due to vessel compromise. So another patient who was run over by a truck and came after 3 weeks with eschar and necrosis of the heel pad. There were implants inside, and this patient was treated with a free flap as well as skin grafts, and this patient had a very good outcome, and the implants were removed. It is important to note that he had fracture of the medial malleolus and the lower part of the tibia, but during the entire course of the treatment, he was treated only by a plaster slab, because it was impossible to treat the wound with implants. Given the situation of this chronic colonized wound, no orthopedic surgeon agreed to put in any kind of implants inside. So with just plaster of Paris slabs and with proper wound care, free flaps and skin graft, these limbs can be salvaged. And of course, this is something that is hidden, that is not discussed much. Is a patient who came to me following both bone fracture, and he presented with an indolent ulcer which would not heal. He already had 3 surgeries for treating this indolent ulcer following removal of his implants for both bone fracture. Now I did an MRI, I did a biopsy, and found there was no cancer. So I excised the entire ulcer. I released all his tendons because he had a clawing of his fingers. I released the nerve. He had a complete healing, and I did a primary closure of the entire wound. But after 2 weeks, when I sent him home after removal of some of the sutures, he came back with 2 more wounds, which were completely separate from this original surgical site. And he came and told me that the previous surgeon who had operated had put in pins and needles through these sites, and these had again broken down. And I needed an inordinate amount of time through psychotherapy and behavior therapy. And then I had to do an occlusive dressing for almost 3 months, right from the wrist up to his upper shoulder, in order to convince his parents and convince the patient that this is a psychological problem by which the patient creates a chronic wound himself and is not something that is the surgeon's fault or any pathology. And this wound, without any intervention, actually healed completely by itself, just by leaving it alone and by occlusive dressing. So takeaway messages is individualized assessment of each patient. Each patient with a chronic wound is different. The patient, the region, and the wound must be assessed separately. And cleaning, debridement of the infection, biopsy for cancer is very important. And most important of all, you have to restitute the patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Adish. I think we will take questions at the end of each session, at the end all together. And may I now ask Convatec to play their video? Yes, please.
Aquacel AG Advantage dressings incorporate two powerful technologies in one dressing: hydrofiber technology and more than silver technology. To advance healing, bioburden and exudate need to be addressed right away. When Aquacel AG Advantage dressing is applied, hydrofiber physically removes and sequesters debris and microorganisms from the wound, locking them within the dressing. Three components within the More Than Silver technology work synergistically to enhance antimicrobial efficacy of ionic silver. BEC is a surfactant that reduces surface tension within bioburden. This action helps the antimicrobial agents to reach their target faster and more efficiently. EDTA is a metal chelating agent that selectively binds and removes the metal ions that hold the bioburden EPS matrix together, exposing the microorganisms within. Now the defenses are lowered. Ionic silver can reach and kill the exposed microorganisms. At a concentration of just 1.2% silver, the dressing provides safe and broad-spectrum antimicrobial activity. The strengthening stitches provide extra tensile strength, allowing for safe one-piece removal. If you are faced with hard-to-heal wounds, choose Aquacel AG Advantage dressings with More Than Silver technology, giving you the power to disrupt and destroy bioburden and advance healing.
We are not supposed to see it. They are seeing it.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to thank Dr. Adish Basu for that excellent presentation. He has taken you through the management, the surgical management of wounds. And now I would like to ask Dr. Kalyan Das. He's an assistant professor of plastic surgery at the SSKM Hospital, which is the premier institute of the state. And he's going to talk to you about the non-surgical management of wounds. So how to get them ready to the state where you can do your flaps or grafts or whatever is needed for the patient. Dr. Kalyan Das, please.
Is I audible? Good evening, everybody. I would like to talk today on the non-surgical management, which is a very important part and integral part of wound healing in the 7th webinar series of the Association of Plastic Surgeons of West Bengal. As told by my previous speaker, Dr. Adish Basu, that a wound needs to be assessed under various headings. That is the cause of the wound, the various characteristics of the wound, and the way the wound is healing, whether important structures are exposed within the wound and whether it is infected. With this background, there are two main types of wounds, the acute wounds and the chronic wounds. In our presentation, we are mainly focused on difficult wounds which comes to plastic surgeons, and those are mainly non-healing wounds or wounds with potential problems. So chronic wounds thus represents a silent epidemic which affects a large fraction of the world population. And though there are several ways to heal tissue defects, but non-surgical or minimally invasive techniques to heal wounds are still in research. The main defect of a wound healing, which thereby goes into a chronic non-healing wound, is a defective cell migration. That is the rate limiting step, whether it is epithelial or whether it is the ECM, that is extracellular matrix. So the first important step to clean a wound is debridement, which is derived from a French word that is debrider, that is to remove adhesion. A sharp or surgical debridement is the king, as we all believe. But there are other certain types of debridement, like the mechanical debridement, the chemical or enzymatic debridement, the autolytic debridement, which are important adjuvants to the sharp surgical debridements where condition may not support the surgeon or the patient to undergo a sharp surgical debridement at that time. What we have to do is we have to assess the blood supply of the area and the surrounding area before doing a debride. An ischemic wound is an altogether different wound, and hence the blood supply to the wound is most important, and maneuvers or techniques to increase blood supply to the wound by methods of angioplasties should be considered in those scenarios. The mechanical wound debridement, for example, the hydrotherapies, the negative pressure wound therapies, takes longer time than the surgical debridement, as we all know, and it is very important to take tissues out, that is necrotic tissues, and in exudative wounds where mechanical debridement has a key role to play. The enzymatic debridements in the form of certain collagenases or certain papinuria enzyme systems, which can be applied to wound, does it even over a longer period of time, that it requires weeks and even months. An autolytic debridement by change of dressing is the slowest, but it is the least invasive, and with proper technique we can apply it to a subset of patients. The very important part, as described by my earlier speaker, is the wound bed preparation, and in the early 2000s, the time principle, that is we have to identify that non-viable or the deficient tissues in the wound, the amount of infection, that is the amount of the microbial load, the moisture imbalance, and the edge of the wound, which entails both the epithelial and the ECM non-migration. So the healing is most likely to be achieved if we, as surgeons and as wound doctors, care about the time principle and approach our wounds based on those principles. So any non-viable tissue needs to be debrided, needs to be taken off. That is the first step. Antibiotics, systemic antibiotics or local antibiotics, wound cleansing solutions, which we use like 3% hydrogen peroxide or dilute povidone iodine solutions, all these things, as well as the local wound cleanings. And the most important is the moisture balance, because evidence tells that moisture is most important, that is a moist wound environment is most important to achieve proper healing. And the rate limiting step, that is the epithelial edge of the wound, is important, not only but also the extracellular matrix, as found in chronic venous ulcer, that is the CVUs, which has a deficient ECM and thus does not heal very well. Dressings are an important part of non-surgical management. There are certain characteristics of ideal dressings. The ideal dressing should be non-toxic, should be less harmful in the surrounding skin. It should be easily available. It should be cost effective, and it should have important fluid handling characteristics. The fluid characteristics that means that the dressing should change with the nature of the wound. That is, an exudative wound should be dressed differently than a dry wound with a necrotic or an eschar. As my previous speaker has highlighted that in 1962, an article with Winter et al. Had shown that in a domestic pigs, the superficial wounds, the most important thing is the moisture over the wound, which can lead to faster healing, as important as a twice faster healing than when it is exposed to air. So the moist wounds always heals better. Hence, modern wound dressing types, that is the interactive and bioactive types, concentrates on this issue that environment should be provided to wounds. Passive dressings are most commonly used like gauze or tully. These are mainly non-occlusive. The interactive wound dressings like the foams, hydrogels, hydrocolloids are occlusive or occlusive. The foams are easily available. They are important for exudating and granulating wounds. The hydrogels are for dry chronic wounds, necrotic wounds, as it contains very high amount of moisture. And hydrocolloids are for pressure ulcer, burns, traumatic wounds, and difficult wounds. These are the types of dressings which are usually available to us. We have to choose the important components of the dressing, because some of the dressings are composite, that is, they have different various types of things inside them. And I would like to elaborate more on the hydrogels. The hydrogels, as its name entails, are dressings with very high water content, that is about 95 to 97% of water. It is suitable for most of the wound healing, most of the wounds in all healing stages. It can be applied directly, and it can be applied more in situations where surgical debridement is considered harmful at that point. The problems are exudate accumulation. And are impermeable. Though they are impermeable to bacteria from outside, but they are permeable to vapor, and thus they can provide a good moist environment, which is the key to a good wound healing in difficult situations. Acidic pH is another important thing. In vitro studies, it has been found that pH around 5, which is lower than the body pH, is important for cellular migration and for metalloproteinases to act. Hence, hydrocolloids in addition maintain an acidic pH in the wound bed. I would like to add some points on hydrofiber technology, though it has been elaborated by Dr. Basu. In hydrofiber technology, the important point is the dressing material gels and it molds into the wound surface, and hence deep wounds or wounds with a lot of undermining are important, are they suitable where we can suitably apply this hydrofiber technology. So exudative wounds and the wounds where there are multiple strata or where it goes inside is important, where we can use this. There are certain components of the hydrofiber technology like the EDTA, which disrupts the biofilm, the BEC, which also transfers the silver to the dressing, the ionic silver, which is released gradually as the biofilm disappears, and it provides a good pH for adequate wound healing. The benzethonium chloride, which is a component of this hydrofiber technology in some of the dressings, is a surfactant, and it reduces the surface tension, and thus it provides a good contact of the material with the wound exudate and the biofilm. So if we try to summarize the various dressings in necrotic, colloid and hydro dressings are important. In exudative, that is where a lot of exudative is coming, then alginate foams are important. In granulating, we can use even moist gauze. Hydrocolloids and foam, if available, are better. And in epithelizing, which is epithelizing well, we can apply films, we can apply non-adherent dressings like Tule gauze. And in cases of sloughy wounds, any type of wound dressing like the hydrogels, hydrocolloids in that order, even alginates and foams can be used. Bioactive dressings are certain other types of dressings which contain certain important biomaterials like collagen, like hyaluronic acid, alginate, and it can provide, in addition, growth factors and antimicrobials. The important topic which shown statistically is the MDT, or the maggot debridement therapy, where maggots of Lucilia sericata are placed on necrotic sloughy wounds. And before placing, there should be egg disinfection, chloramine use, povidone and sodium hypochlorite, cleaning of the wound, and it does not, the maggot does not literally consume the pieces of tissue, but it secretes certain important bioactive ingredients which cleans the wound very well in a short span of time. It can be, the maggots can be applied by loosely, or usually it is applied by biobag, that is a polyester biobag, where about 5 to 10 larvae per square centimeter is applied to the wound. The contraindications are facial wounds, malignant wounds, and dry necrotic eschar. Dry necrotic eschar cannot be taken care by maggots. We have to debride it by other techniques, and sloughs and exudative wounds, especially where debridement can result in loss of vascularity, like the electrical burn wounds, maggot debridement has good application. There are certain wound healing scores. I will not go into detail of it. The wound healing scores can be both clinical as well as histological, and these are important parameters how well wounds are healing. And laser Doppler flowmetry to evaluate continuous blood flow is a new instrument in our armamentarium, where we can see the tissue hypoxia and the blood flow, that is blood flow per square centimeter of the non-healing wounds. So the amount of, if we go to the histological parameter of wound healing assessment, then the amount of granulation tissues, the inflammatory infiltrates, the collagen fiber orientation, the pattern of the collagen fiber in the wound, all these things may be taken into account. The other mechanical debridements are by methods of irrigation of wounds, the hydrotherapy and negative pressure wound therapy, which we are familiar with. So I would not detail pressure therapy, since for last about a decade we are using negative pressure therapy effectively. A subatmospheric pressure, that is about 125 millimeter mercury average, that is the best pressure which has been found to be the most effective. The NPWT gives rise to mechanical edge contraction and statistically decreased bacterial load. It can be applied in an intermittent mode or continuous mode, and it can be used by black. We can use black foam or silver impregnated foam. This is a photograph where the vacuum assisted closure has been shown to decrease the bacterial load. It increases the various growth factor levels. It is even claimed to increase blood flow in certain parts and stimulate granulation tissues. The most important effect of the NPWT is mechanotransduction, that it results in a positive chemical activity from the mechanical force it applies to the wounds, and thus gives rise to a congenial wound environment. There are several complications reported, even deaths, when NPWT has been applied over thoracic wounds following mediastinitis. So hemorrhage, loss of electrolytes, exudative hypoproteinemia, pain on application, and most important is retained foam, which can lead to intracutaneous fistulas and chronic discharging sinus. The level of evidence as of now is not very clear in Cochrane databases. The most studies they give a benefit to therapy, but there are clear-cut biases. So therapy or the pulse lavage therapy, uh, those are important. Those are the important part of the hydrotherapy. The hydrotherapy, the whirlpool therapy has been used earlier by certain surgeons in America, where burn wounds has been treated by submersing the wounds, but there were problems with Pseudomonas infection, and hence now pulse lavage or jet lavage is done, where 10 to 15 psi pressures, the high pressure jet system is used to remove debris and decrease bacterial colonization. Hyperbaric oxygenation is another important part of non-surgical wound healing, where 100% oxygen at greater than atmospheric pressure, that is 2 to 3 atmospheric pressure, is given systemically, not to the wound, and it increases the dissolved oxygen plasma, and and we all know that chronic wounds are always hypoxic, and hence a little increase in the plasma oxygen can lead to better healing. This is it was first devised by by Henshaw. Then after the discovery of oxygen, Churchill Davidson published an important article on HBOT. After that, it had been gradually accepted and is now used in certain circumstances. The indications are clostridial myonecrosis, crushed compartment, necrotizing soft tissue infections, compromised grafts and flaps, and acute thermal burns. As we were discussing, that it increases PO2 in endo organs, it also increases the hydrostatic pressure, hence it has some adverse effects. It has anti-edema effects, and as we all know that 97% of oxygen is saturated by hemoglobin, the rest 3% can be increased by HBOT therapy. This is an algorithm by which we can choose the important point is the transcutaneous partial pressure of oxygen. We have to have a method to assess that and then choose HBOT therapy in a subset of patients. Usually it is given twice daily, that is in about a total of 90 minutes of therapy each time. The adverse effects are ear and sinus barotraumas. We have to have consent of that, and fire within chamber convulsions in pediatric patients that can feel they may feel claustrophobic, and cost is an issue. Just to correct the aspects of wound biochemistry and cell biology, I will just run over the collagen, the oxidized regenerated cellulose, which is the new kid in the block, the ADM, that is the acellular dermal regenerative matrix, which is used for covering implants as well as for difficult wound healing situations. There are certain trials where topical phenytoin and processed anion has been successfully used for difficult wounds. Platelets, which has come up in the last about 15 years, and platelets are rich source of growth factors and platelet derived growth factor as well as other growth factors, and hence they are important in increasing the wound, the character of the wound, where epithelialization as well as closure can be achieved. Stem cell therapy, there are approximately 500 clinical trials which are currently taking place, and it is and mesenchymal stem cells as well as adipose-derived stem cells and the embryonic stem cells. Those are used along with certain scaffolds inside the wounds. The pure platelet-rich plasma, that is without leukocytes, has the highest growth factor levels, and hence pure platelet-rich plasma can be applied directly or topically to the wounds, difficult wounds, to increase the growth factors inside that wound. It should be used serially. We in our institute use it for about every thrice weekly. Every 3 weeks, and we follow it up after 3 applications. We measure the wound size and see the characteristic of the granulation tissue which has been formed. There are bioengineered skin and skin grafts. It can be of dermal or of epidermal in nature, and it can be composite where fibroblast and keratinocyte co-culture can be used. These are available now, but it has a rider. It is very costly and also not available freely. The epidermal therapies are Epicel. These are all brand names, I must acknowledge, and they are derived from human fibroblasts. And dermoepidermal, though these are less stable, are now available, and they are important source of the collagen. The electromagnetic lasers as well as the ultrasounds are termed physical therapy, are the components of the physical therapy, where there is because we live in an energy system and there is a transfer of energy to and from the wound, and if we can influence that, then cell migration, which is the rate limiting step of our non-healing wound or a wound healing, can be regulated. Shock wave therapy by simple extracorporeal shock wave has been shown to increase growth factor levels as well as nitric oxide levels, and nitric oxide gives rise to higher vascular. So wound margin electrotherapy and creating electromagnetic fields has an important effect on homing of bone marrow derived mesenchymal cells, and it also depresses genes which decreases the wound healing. Photobiomodulation is a new term, and this has been inducted into the mesh term in as last 5 years, and it has been shown that there are certain intracellular components like the cytochrome C oxidase which are photoacceptor, and it can be positively influenced by lasers, though with long wavelength laser like 660 nanometer lasers can be used to reduce the metalloproteinases in the wound. Nanotechnologies, since we are living in the era of technology, smart wound therapies and nanotechnologies are used in wound healing. Nanotechnologies has an important application in delivering antimicrobials like silver, that is nanosilver, and it can make good surface area contact with the wound, and it is important for certain drug deliveries like zinc oxides. Since we are living in the era of technology, daily home use of certain devices which can be attached with mobile devices, that is internet devices, can be used so that certain areas like peripheral neuropathy wounds, that is a neuropathic ulcer, can be taken care of. To summarize, with the exception of HBOT and possibly the negative pressure wound therapy, there is little evidence as of now to justify use of newer therapies, but stem cell therapies and other wound therapies where we can use tools based on the condition or the type of wound can be chosen more easily as we progress more into these fields. So non-surgical treatment modalities for chronic wounds should be based on the type of the wound. Thank you for patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Kalyan Das, for that nice illustration on the non-surgical methods of wound healing. There's a big armamentarium starting right from the dressings to keep the wound moist, right up to NPWT with lavage and the new things which you have described, like nanotechnology being used, and also in with HBOT they are using now transcutaneous oxygen to give the oxygen to the wound. But all these are still, I think, in the realm of research. Nothing has come into clinical practice as yet. And I may now request Dr. Saptarshi Bhattacharya, consultant plastic surgeon at Apollo Gleneagles Hospital, Kolkata. He is also the secretary of the Association of Plastic Surgeons of West Bengal, and he is going to talk on scars, which are very, very difficult to manage and are a plastic surgeon's nightmare. So now I hand over the mic to Dr. Saptarshi Bhattacharya. Dr. Saptarshi Bhattacharya, please.
Good evening. So after the wounds comes the scars. To the general public, for a plastic surgeon, once a plastic surgeon operates, should not be there. If you say that there will be scars, they will be say, "Oh, is that so?" For them, scars if you are going to a plastic surgeon, there should be no scars. However, we all know that once a wound heals, scars are mandatory. I will try to just overview of what the management of scars stands at this point with the possible levels of evidence that are available. I'll just quickly go through that and enumerate the things. What are scars? Scars are basically macroscopic fibrous tissue that replaces the normal skin after injury, and it may have a wide spectrum resulting from wounds, from fetal wound healing, from a fine line scars to stretched scars to atrophic scars to contractures and hypertrophic scars, and we've seen all types of that. For patients, the scars are basically deeply emotional and also physical, because for many of them, it also causes functional disability. For the physicians, it represents an endpoint of tissue healing. So once a patient comes with a scar, what do we do first? History and physical examination is, of course, absolutely essential. You want to know the etiology, what happened, whether there was an infection. Infection causes a worse, bad scar, whether there were any associated symptoms that was already there, whether there was radiation, whether the skin was already exposed to radiation or steroid. You have to see the scar to see the size, the color, the texture, what is the relationship with the other structures, so that you can just try to think what the normal structure would look like, whether it is tethered or whether there is any contracture, and whether it changes with movement. So for scar assessment, different scales have been there, but these scales are basically more for a research purpose than for a regular clinical assessment. However, the Vancouver scar scale had been widely used for burn scars, and it is basically based on pigmentation, vascularity, pliability. It can be used to other scars also. Now, two most important things which cause excessive scarring are hypertrophic scar and the keloid. And these are scars which we deal with a lot. A patient comes to you with either a hypertrophic scar or a keloid scar, and also definitely scar contractures and other different types of scars. But these two are something different from a normal scar. So what is a hypertrophic scar? It's a pathological scars that have not overgrown the original wound boundaries, but are raised. These are often painful and pruritic, and they have a higher levels of neuropeptide substance P. These are generally secondary to excessive tensile forces across the wound, and it's common in wounds across the flexion surfaces, the extremities, breast, and neck. It's generally a self-limiting process, and it goes away with time, and there is no clear histological difference between a hypertrophic scar and a keloid. However, keloids do have more thicker collagen fibers. Keloids are defined as scars that overgrow the original wound edges. There is a definite genetic predisposition with autosomal dominant features. It continues to enlarge past its original wound boundaries, and it behaves like a benign skin tumor with continued slow growth. Excision and primary closure of the defect result in recurrence in the majority to do something else along, mainly consisting of the collagen, and it's acellular in the central portions with fibroblasts which are present along the borders. However, remember, fibroblasts are not present in excessive numbers, but it's just concentrated along the borders, and the scar just keeps on growing. The collagen deposition outpaces the degradation of the collagen, and that is why the scars keep on growing. And this may be a result of excessive stimulation or an inappropriate response to the stimulation, so that the scar maturation does not occur. So once we come to the scars, what are the stages of management? The first and primary management is prevention. Prevention is better than cure. As other things, the treatment parts, it's non-surgical or the surgical. Surgical, that includes scar revision with its timing, planning, techniques, and post-operative. So in prevention, the surgical technique is very important. If you are doing a primary closure or if you are doing a surgery, a traumatic technique, minimizing the tension, skin eversion, perfect apposition, and use of natural skin tension lines are absolutely necessary. Now, patient-specific factors are to be looked into: diabetic, those with steroid use, history of steroid use with radiation. These patients heal poorly. Wound infections and foreign body reactions, these are to be taken care of. Along with that, along with a good surgical technique, some adjunct therapies like taping, coactive films, silicone gel sheeting, vitamin E and onion extracts, massage, hydrotherapy, ultrasound, camouflage techniques all have been tried with different levels of success. Now, once coming to the treatment part, the treatment of hypertrophic scars, it's mainly, since hypertrophic scars go away with time, initially we try with pressure garments, silicone gel sheets, corticosteroids, laser therapy, and re-excision with a primary closure, which is most useful in cases of excess scar, which is caused by either infection or dehiscence. Now, coming to the silicone gel sheeting, it prevents hypertrophic scar formation and accelerates their involution, and it remodels collagen. There is quite a good level of evidence regarding this one. Compression garments are actually mainly, it's used everywhere in the management of scar management, in burn scar management. It is very, very important. However, recent studies have questioned the role of compression therapy, and the evidence is not very clear as to whether compression therapy actually helps. Intralesional corticosteroid injections, these are the second line of therapy, and they do cause focal suppression of the inflammatory cytokines, and they inhibit fibroblast proliferation. Pulse dye laser and other wavelength specific lasers, they give symptomatic relief of pruritic and erythematous lesions. Fractional CO2 lasers and erbium YAG lasers, they have been useful in treatment of atrophic scars, but not more in hypertrophic scars. Vitamin A, vitamin E, and onion extract, which have been marketed a lot, but there is very little evidence in promoting them. Topical immune modulators like imiquimod 5%, this has been used, but it's still not absolutely, it does not give results in all cases. Skin lightening agents have been used in cases of hyperpigmented scars. However, they have got their own complications. Keloids, if they are not very bad, it's probably better to monitor and do nothing, because excision most likely leads to recurrence. However, if it has to be excised, if it has to be treated, then you have to excise it and administer some adjuvant therapy, which may include a steroid injection, radiation, cryotherapy, laser, and some newer agents like anti-tumor and immunosuppressive agents. Intralesional corticosteroid injection is the first line of therapy. It gives a synergistic benefit with other modalities, including laser, radiotherapy, and cryotherapy. The primary drug what we use is triamcinolone acetonide, either at 10 milligram per ml, or if there is no response, at 40 milligram per ml concentrations, usually given at 4 to 6 weeks duration. It's generally mixed with 2% plain lidocaine in a 50-50 ratio, because it's painful. Injection is quite painful. The early, rapidly proliferating lesions, they respond best, while the slowly growing mature keloids respond poorly. Intra and post-operative intralesional steroid therapy does reduce recurrence. In some studies, up to 50 to 70%, it has been shown. Short course of low-dose radiotherapy to keloid excision wound immediately after excision reduces the rate of recurrence. However, with radiation, there is an immediate and long-term risk of therapy, radiation therapy, including malignant transformation that can occur. It can may be considered only in adults with lesions which are refractory to other modalities. Cryotherapy, this has been tried in early lesions of less than 1 to 2 years duration, and actually which are very small, because cryotherapy, though it acts synergistically with steroid injection, it does have a lot of side effects like pain, blistering, lengthy wound healing time, skin atrophy, and always some disc pigmentation happens. Lasers in keloid therapy, there is a low level of evidence. However, the fractional CO2 lasers have been used recently with some success. The pulse dye lasers, they produce decreased pruritus and scar height, and pulse dye along with intralesional steroid injections have been used with some success, and fractional CO2 laser alone or in combination have been used. Now, a few newer agents have come up that include the anti-neoplastic agents 5-fluorouracil and bleomycin. 5-fluorouracil and steroid injections actually have shown almost equal efficacy without the side effects of skin atrophy. And 5-fluorouracil is generally used in a dosage of 0.2 to 0.5 ml per square centimeter with a dose of 50 50 milligram per ml. So it's given in a weekly dose and not more around 6 to 12 doses. It interferes with the TGF beta signaling pathway and it reduces the formation of further collagen. Bleomycin, it's another anti-neoplastic drug which has been used, and it binds the DNA to prevent mitosis and modulates the TGF beta. Also, interferon has been used, but with limited success. The other drug that has been used is verapamil, which modifies the fibroblast morphology, inhibits IL-6 and VEGF, and it acts as a scar modulator. However, its action takes a lot of time. It has been mostly used along with lasers as a combination therapy. Now, coming to the surgical management, that is scar revision, which is the primary management. So scars, when we see a scar, we have to examine it as we saw earlier. The one thing what we need to see whether the scar is painful and whether there is an retinal sign which may suggest an entrapment of a cutaneous nerve. If that happens, then you have to repair or excise that, and it's important part of a scar revision. Otherwise, the patient will never be happy. Scar contractures, if they cross the joints, they can range in limitations of range of motion, and that is where the functional part comes in. Treatment should be directed at restoration of function with aggressive physical therapy to prevent a recurrence. Scars causing disfigurement, like in burn scars of the face or any other traumatic scars of the face, they should be taken care of, or any exposed parts. And sometimes the complicating psychological issues need to be taken in. So when do you revise a scar? Ideally, when it's a soft, supple, and mature scar. Immature scars have a lot of blood vessels of neovascularization, bleed excessively during surgery. And the tissue in and around the immature scars may be more edematous and less mobile, making local tissue rearrangement more difficult. So a clinical examination is necessary, maybe every monthly or tri-monthly, and delay until the scar is soft and supple. Ideally, it's said it's around 18 months, but you need to examine it regularly. And whenever the scar becomes supple, you can go in for that. Non-operative management, some other non-operative management during this period include massage and silicone sheeting, so as to keep the patient, you can be sure that the patient is compliant. Complex for planning, what we need is we have to see each scars individually. Complex reconstructions involving, if it involves multiple areas, it is directed from larger to the final areas. And for each scar, whether you need a single or multi-stage revision, single stage, simple direct excisions, or complex soft tissue rearrangements are required. This needs to be evaluated. If there is, the direct excision helps best if the initial wound was widened due to either infection or dehiscence or a poor surgical technique. So the other things that may be done is on-table tissue expansion, which can help in direct excision and closure, and undermining and advancement of the skin edges. See, if you are not sure whether a direct skin excision and a primary closure can be done, a serial excision or tissue expansion as a stage strategy much better for a scar revision. What is important is if it's a tethered scar, you must release the scar from the tissue, and interposition of muscle, fascia, and the soft tissue fillers like fat, autografts, and acellular dermis all have been used so that the tethering is released. In the principles of tissue arrangement, same atraumatic technique, tensionless closure and proper skin eversion as emphasized in primary closure is required. However, here, what is most important is the restoration of the anatomical landmarks like the Hermilian border or the eyelid position or the alar base. And we have to plan it in such a way so that the resultant scars are hidden in the resting skin lines, and scars might be elongated where they're contracted, it might be elongated and irregularized. What it does, this local tissue rearrangement, what it does is reorients the scar, breaks up a length of scar by incorporating neighboring tissue, relaxes pull on each end of the scar towards the center, and contractile forces are displaced into axis perpendicular to length of scar. So most common technique for tissue rearrangement is a Z-plasty, which is used to lengthen a scar, to break up a straight line, to move tissues from one area to the other, and to obliterate or create a web. This is theoretical gain in length of the central limb of a Z-plasty according to the angles of the limbs. Other things that may be used is a skewed Z-plasty, a 4-flap plasty, a 5-flap plasty, W-plasties, V2I advancements, and these all are about tissue rearrangements. What is most important is whatever you do after that, you have to have a very good post-operative care and follow-up schedule. So that initially there is an optimal wound healing, there should not be no infection, there should be adequate nutrition. If the patient is diabetic, have a good blood sugar control, stop smoking, and try to take as much precautions as possible so that wound healing is the other factors behind wound healing are as good as possible. The long-term prevention and treatment are absolutely necessary. Following revision, use tapes, silicone sheets, compression, scar massage, lasers, whatever is available with you, so as to give the long-term follow-up to evaluate the efficacy of any treatment as is must. Now, two more things that come to the mind. One is the platelet-rich plasma, which has been used in many things recently, including cosmetic. In cosmetics and in wound healing. So here also, platelet-rich plasma has been used for. It's mainly used for acne scars and atrophic scars. So, however, still there is a low level of evidence as to how much it helps. And what the theory behind this is that it delivers a high concentration of growth factors to the target tissues and improves the wound healing and scarring parameters. Other thing is botulinum recently, and it has been shown that it delays the fibroblast growth, decreases the TGF-beta1 and reduces fibrosis. And it also causes muscular paralysis and reduced tension over the primary and treatment and prevention of hypertrophic scars and keloids. It has got a very low level of evidence. However, in improving facial scars, in primary facial scars, if we give it primarily or very early, then it has shown a fair degree of efficacy in improving the facial surgical scars. And this has been by a randomized controlled trial in a split scar trial. So in summary, we need to see the patient well and to do follow the techniques of scar revision and try to establish the anatomical boundaries and give him adjuvant therapies. Thank you very much for a patient hearing.
So thank you again, Saptarshi, for dealing with the most difficult part, that is scars. And I think as plastic surgeons, day and night, our only aim is how to prevent scar formation and how to, as you said in the beginning of your talk, the moment a plastic surgeon touches a patient, he thinks he's going to have surgery without scars. So to explain to them that scars are a part of healing, to wait for the time, which is very, very important after any burns or any acute trauma, that wait for the scar to mature, don't touch it before at least 1 year, and then try and rearrange the scars. The management of keloids is another difficult problem. So we come to the question and answer session, and I request all participants to please send in your questions. I begin with what is already there with me. The first question is, what is the picture frame theory, or can you elucidate on the picture frame theory of wound healing? Adish, would you like to take the question? I think Kalyan is not on the screen. Kalyan, could you join us, please?
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question by one of the participants is, what is the picture frame theory? I mean, could you elucidate on the picture frame theory of scars?
I think Shopturji, it is about the picture frame effect of a scar. You have to, if you
Picture
want to
frame
answer it,
theory of,
you can go ahead.
I think mainly means wound management.
Yeah. I think the picture frame theory, what it used to say is that, I think I've read somewhere that the wounds of a scar contract circumferentially, and if you release it, it releases like a picture frame. It's something of that sense. I can't remember exactly what it said, but I think that's what it is. You need to release all the scars in all the directions so that proper release is obtained. That's what is the essence of it, as far as I can remember.
Yeah, I think basically it refers to that only. It's like, it heals also that way, the contraction comes in from all sides. So probably when you release a scar, you'll have to release it in that same direction. There's another question is the management of facial scars. I think this Shopturshi can take. Management of facial scars.
Yes, facial scars, actually management of facial scars, it will depend on where the scar is and what is the extent of the scar, what are the anatomical organs it's involving, whether it's a tethered scar or whether it's it's a circumferential, a circular scar, whether it is producing, it will depend on a lot of things basically. Initially, the idea is whenever it's a bigger scar, initially the idea is to have to release the scar to create the defect and to produce the anatomical landmarks. That is what is the first point. Next, you see whether there is a tissue defect or not. If there is, if the scar has got a contracture, if it's in a single line, then we use the tissue rearrangement things like Z plus T or a W plus T to break up the scar, to increase the length of the scar so that there is no contracture in a single direction. If it's a circumferential scar, which with a tissue loss, then we have to replace the tissues. So it will depend on what is the type of the scar and what organ, what anatomical structures it's actually involving. We may have to bring in other tissue if it's a larger scar. So it will depend on that basis.
Yeah, I think basically respect the lines of skin tension, try and keep your scars within those lines, especially like in the nasolabial fold, try and keep your scars there, or along the lower and upper eyelids, keep them transverse, and then bring in tissue. As you said, if you can't rearrange tissues, then you will have to go in for either a graft or a flap. Even full thickness grafts do well, especially in the eyelid region. So I think every region of the face is a different entity by itself, and the closure of facial scars, I think, is different from region of in the different aesthetic units of the face. The next question is mechanism and principles of action of silicone gel sheet and compression garments. How are they applied, and what is the mechanism of action in scar tissue?
Silicone gel sheet, actually scars are such a big topic, so you cannot cover it within such a short presentation. So mostly what it does is silicone gel sheets, it increases the hydration, and what it does is the collagen is reoriented to produce in proper bundle so that the scar matures much better. That is what is the main thing, and it also modulates the scar with certain TGF beta modulators so that the scars become supple. As for the pressure garments, it's the mechanical part along with the hydration that has been shown to act the most. However, there are still controversies regarding how exactly.
Various theories. Yeah. The most, I think, one point needs to be mentioned where silicon and pressure garments act. The mechanism, one of the mechanisms is hypoxia. I think the pressure as well as the scar, the silicon, they both act mechanically as well as they produce some hypoxic environment where there is stimulus for
Liquid.
remodeling. Stimulus for remodeling.
I think my take on that is this is my interpretation of it. You can't quote me on this in an examination, but my take on this is that for any wound to modulate from a hypertrophic scar to a normal scar, the percentage of type 1 and type 3 collagen proportion has to go back to normal skin. So in order to do that, you have to have a moist environment inside the scar, which is produced by the silicon, and also the hypoxia that causes the protein to denaturate and regenerate. So both the things of degenerating of the old protein type 3 into type 1, as well as the water that allows it to move around, are both important in reshaping the scar. Although this is all hypothesis, and I don't think there will be any study conclusively proving any of them.
Yeah, I think most studies say that there's no conclusive evidence. I think regarding the efficacy of pressure garments and also silicone gel sheets, because most studies are flawed. But I think what it gives us is it gives us time, and it gives the patient something to do in the time we are waiting for actually the tissue to settle in for the edema to reduce before we go in for the rearrangement or maybe whatever we are planning to do, Z plus T's or revisions. So Dr. Guha has a question. What is the role of nutrition in non-surgical wound management? Kalyan, I think would like to take this question.
Yes, in my presentation, I focused on mainly the local wound topics. Definitely, nutrition has a very important role, especially in burn wounds and with larger wounds where there is a high catabolism going on and there is a negative nitrogen balance. So, protein calorie malnutrition can result in larger wounds. And much of the essential micronutrients like the vitamins and certain minerals that needs to be produced, needs to be provided to the patient or in order to improve the nutrition. There are other certain facts like in a wound where we can apply certain antiseptics, as I was telling, like the Cadoxamar iodine, which has come up new, which is a type of a gel, but it contains certain antibacterial properties, and those can also result in improvement of the local wound environment. So nutrition as well as local wound environment both has to go hand in hand in order to achieve a better wound closure.
Cardoxima, iodine, EDTs, and all these dressings, these are all, I think, the newer interventions to disrupt biofilms. Since we've understood biofilms,
yes,
all the
we had a very nice presentation.
To disrupt biofilms and prevent the reformation. But as you mentioned, nutrition is very, very important, especially in burns. If you have a higher percentage of burns, you are never going to get the wound to heal if the patient doesn't have adequate nutrition. And as we know, there are various formulas for nutrition and how to calculate the calorie requirement. And I think burns is the only wound where almost the requirement is into 3 of what a normal person would require. And unless you push in nitrogen, push in proteins, you're not going to get those wounds to heal. So I think that's where the main importance of nutrition in wound healing. And then the next question is that is there any role of physiotherapy? I think maybe what the question is that is there a role of physiotherapy in preventing scar formation?
Definitely. Definitely, in cases of scars across the joints, there might be some role of physiotherapy. However, if there is a deficiency of tissue and if the scars are large scars across joints, they will contract. whether you do therapy, maybe the functional deficiency will not be as much. But however, post-operatively, once you release a scar, you need to do a proper physiotherapy.
Yeah, so I think there are no further questions. And if, if anyone, I think to summarize, what I would like to say is that, like, when you're preparing a wound, the new things which we've learned is about biofilms. You have to take care of them, prevent the formation, take efforts to break them up when they form, especially in chronic wounds, and then try and cover the wound as early as you can. Nutrition is very, very important, especially in burns. And as Adhi showed you, that although we have the reconstructive ladder, we have lots of options, and you can choose what is best for your patient. And even the patients who were healed by secondary intention showed very, very good results, because it's not always that the most complex method gives the best results. So you have to, and also you have to individualize, and I think tailor your options to look at the patient's general condition. If he's moribund, he's bedridden, you can't do a big surgery on him. So then I think you have to keep using dressings and get the wounds healed. And I think Saptashi took you through the scars and its management, all the difficult topics. We all use silicone gel and the various compression garments. And I think the latest thing is 5-fluorouracil for management of keloids, which all of us are using. And I've used lasers also for your scars, though I haven't got very good results with the IPL laser for scar management. But we've just started using 5-fluorouracil. I think it's too early to give anything. I don't know what the other panelists feel, whether they've used 5-fluorouracil and what the results are. But I think that's a new thing which everybody can try, since it's been proven effective, and it causes less hypopigmentation, because steroids, the moment you give them longer and the scar flattens, you'll have hypopigmentation around the area of injection. So I thank all the panelists for giving their valuable time, for taking the time out to prepare the presentations, and all of you for a patient hearing. And I'd like to inform you that our next webinar from APSWB is on this Saturday. It's at 7 p.m. by Dr. Jerry O'Daniel, and who's going to talk to us about the principles of facial rejuvenation. Thank you.
Thank you, madam.